Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by introducing who is here. I kept saying we, that is because you have two speakers today. I'll start with myself. I've been working in PDF and automation for about, well, unfortunately, more than 20 years by now. I started working in 1996 with a company called Infocus, which you might know, on a product called Pitstop. Actually tailored first, but very quickly that turned into Pitstop, and I was the first developer on that product for a couple of years. Then in 2002, June 2002, we started the Ghent Workgroup. I was involved with that from the beginning. At the moment, I'm executive director of the Ghent Workgroup. I'm also co-chair of the specification subcommittee. In 2004, I joined, or co-founded rather, Gradual Software, which developed Switch, which is now also an Infocus product. And then the last 10 years or so, I have been working as CTO at 4Ps. We're a value-added distributor, working with a number of different vendors, mostly with tools that are in prepress.
And I am your second speaker for today. My name is Elli Cloots. I started in 2000 at Infocus. I actually have a history that is quite similar to David's. We've known each other for less than 20 years, but not that many years less. And we worked very closely on the Pitstop products back in those days. I did support and training for Pitstop and headed the support department. I got involved in the Ghent Workgroup also very early on. Even before the Ghent Workgroup, David and I were already working close with some of the associations in specific countries. When it became the Ghent Workgroup, a few years later I became technical officer, and today I am the vice chair of the Ghent Workgroup. I became director of professional services at Gradual Software at one point in time, and I'm now the senior product marketing manager at EFI, mainly focused on the Fiery digital front ends. So that's the RIPs and workflow solutions that drive our digital presses. Let me start with a short history of the Ghent Workgroup. We go back already quite a number of years. The Ghent Workgroup was founded, as David said, in 2002. And we have a mission statement. We focus really around two things. One is to create these best practices and specifications, not like ISO would do, but more focused on specific market segments and making things work in practice. This can be in the form of a specification like we will be discussing today, but this can also be in the form of white papers and educational materials or tools to test your workflows. The other part we do is we distribute all of these materials and all of our knowledge. Now, one way to do that is this webinar. Other ways is our website. We also have a newsletter, and we try to really spread the news and all of our knowledge as much as possible.
So, today is about digital print and digital print specifications, but let me give you a little bit of background so that you know where we come from and what we're actually doing. I always find this a very nice image to show to people, to make them understand what happens in our standardization space. All of the work that we are doing, and more so in graphic arts, is based on PDF. And PDF by itself is an ISO standard these days. The standard number is 32,000, and that means that it is the International Standards Organization that is responsible for the development of new PDF versions. On top of that ISO standard, from around 2001, we actually started building other ISO standards, and PDFX is the one that is most relevant for graphic arts. PDFX comes from blind exchange. The X comes out of the word exchange. And the idea behind PDFX was to develop a standard that was usable in the whole graphic arts industry. And then what the Ghent Workgroup does, rather than trying to fight the PDFX standard, is we use their work. So all of the Ghent Workgroup specifications are built on top of PDFX, which means that as new PDFX versions get developed, we have all the best of that world, and then we can add our own restrictions and capabilities on top of that. And of course, what you as a customer, or what your customers, in case of people working for vendors, can do is they can use those specifications and add their own specific workflow requirements. So this really is this picture of one doll that fits into the other doll, and so on and so on. Everything builds on top of the previous standard. As I said, all of the Ghent Workgroup specifications are built on top of PDFX. You'll find two flavors, if you want, of that on our website. Older specifications that are built on top of PDFX 1A, and newer specifications built on PDFX 4. And the reason that we have these specifications, of course, is that we're more targeted than PDFX. PDFX is for the complete graphic arts industry, and just one topic that we cannot do in PDFX, for example, is image resolution. You cannot have a requirement for image resolution in PDFX because you don't know what image resolution is going to be needed. It is for the whole graphic arts industry, and in some cases you might need 300 dpi, in other cases you're happy to have 36 or 12 dpi. So PDFX does not contain that. In the Ghent Workgroup specifications, you'll see variants, and these variants are made for different market segments, use cases, printing technologies, and in those variants we can add such requirements as image resolution and many others.
Now, in 2015, the Ghent Workgroup released a new specification with a number of variants. Some of these variants have already been existing in previous versions as well. Mostly the variants are focused on ad delivery, like magazine ads and newspaper ads. What do they need to comply to be usable? But also a lot is around offset, where we've got specifications for web offset, sheet fed offset, versions with CMYK only allowed, and spot colors, or we've got variations that also allow RGB colors. Then there's packaging variants that are part of that specification as well. Now, we did a survey asking what is missing. In that survey, we asked a lot of things, of course. We also asked what are people using the Ghent Workgroup for, what information do they find useful, how did they learn about the Ghent Workgroup. But we also asked which standards or specifications might you be missing. And as you can see on the slide, the most popular specification missing was digital print. Now, we did already expect that a little bit, because on regular occasions we got a question on what should I use for my digital printer. But we always pointed people to the sheet-fed offset specification, CMYK. Now, when we saw this and the fact that it was so wanted, we did start working on that digital specification. Another specification that was requested a lot was for large format printing. So for large format printing, we also have a webinar in this series, and we'll show you a little later the date on that, but that might also be an interesting one for some of you on the webinar.
That's maybe also something to mention. When we say digital print, we're looking at small format digital print, right? Of course, when you think about large format print, in many cases there is also digital technologies used. but the requirements are very different, and we need a whole webinar to talk about that. If you're interested more in that part, don't hesitate, go to the Ghent Workgroup website and register for the upcoming large format print webinar.
So we got started. We worked, as we always do, within the specification committee with a number of the experts, and started developing a digital printing variant. Now, there's a lot of technical requirements on the list. We grouped them in a number of topics here, and don't get scared. It's a limited set of slides. We won't start talking ISO language, but we will try to explain a number of the requirements and changes compared to some of our other specifications that we did specifically for this one. All of our specifications today are based on PDFX, as David already explained. The one for digital print small format, we based on PDFX 4 2010, and that already includes a lot of different requirements that are needed. Now, with that specification comes also support for transparencies. It is allowed to use transparencies, put an image there from a drop shadow, but it can be any type of transparency as long as it's defined according to the specification. Then there's also support for layers, by the way, just to make sure that we can get layers printed in a correct way and you don't have any unexpected results. There's some requirements around that. There's fonts need to be embedded, of course, because otherwise you don't know which font you'll end up printing. Subsetted or completely embedded is allowed. And there's a lot of things around document quality in general to just make sure that the file is printable.
And the next topic has more to do with document and pages. Some of our specifications are very strict about that. For example, if you look at the add specifications, then they will restrict the PDF document to only one page. They will error out if the document if the page that one page that is there would be empty. In the digital specification, we cannot make such restrictions because the workflows in there are, of course, too diverse for that, and the documents that are handled are too diverse. What is in there is a requirement to have the CRO box the same size as the media box. And to explain that in non-technical language, the CRO box is what you see when you open the document in Acrobat, for example. The media box is everything that is in the file. And the reason that these two have to be the same is because otherwise you could open the file in Acrobat and have a certain view on it. And if you print the document, you actually would see more. And we want to avoid that kind of confusion. For page sizes, there is an error if page sizing, page scaling is applied. That also has a technical PDF term, which is user units. But basically that allows you to say that a file should, for example, be printed 10 times bigger than it actually looks in the PDF document itself. Again, could lead to confusion and mistakes, so it's not allowed. And there is a warning when page sizes differ from page to page, or when the page orientation differs. For example, a document where every page would be A4, but some pages would be landscape and other portrait. Again, because it could cause confusion. It's important to note that this is a warning, which typically means that the file in an automated workflow would still be allowed to go through the automated workflow and onto the printer, but that information is just there in a pre-flight report so that you can see that the document has different print sizes or page orientation. Very difficult topic always is color. In this sense, the digital print specification fits within the framework of what the Ghent Workgroup invented with the 2015 specifications, but it uses the RGB variant. And what that means is that for some objects, specifically images, it is allowed to use certain calibrated color spaces. In other words, you can use something like RGB as long as there is an ICC profile attached with that RGB image. And you can also use LAB images, again, as long as they, or because they are properly color managed. For all other objects, so things that are non-images, and that means typically text or vector elements, it is only allowed to use device gray, device CMYK, or device N/spot color. The reason for this is so that in a digital print workflow where you have devices that often have a very good gamut, you can take advantage of images that are RGB to print the best possible image, but you won't run into problems with text being blurry because it is improperly separated, or the same for vector elements. So there is this distinction between images and objects that are not images, and images in this case are allowed a little bit more leeway in terms of color. What is important is that the output intent in the file always has to be a CMYK ICC profile, and this is done because most of the output devices, most of the printers that are in this segment are CMYK devices. So it is most logical to have an output intent that is also CMYK, and because having other types of output intents like LAB or RGB could, with the current state of software and hardware, lead to all kinds of undesirable effects. One last point, not terribly important perhaps, or at least you could think so, but the transparency blend color space, and that's a very difficult concept that has to do with live transparency and defines how that transparency is calculated in the end. That blend color space must be device CMYK. The reason why that is so, you can see from the image on this slide, where you see the result where a blend color space has an incorrect color space, and the fact that this can actually destroy the document and give you a different look of the document than what you're expecting to see in the end. So for this too, because of this uncertainty that you have, the Ghent Workgroup says that the blend color space always has to be device CMYK.
Another thing that we changed is our resolution requirements. If you look at the CMYK sheet offset specification, those requirements are higher. We ask for a higher resolution than what we think is acceptable within a digital cut sheet workflow. For grayscale and color images, we chose 95 ppi. If it's lower than that, you'll get an error, so the file will be stopped in a workflow. While if you get 150, let's say, ppi, then the file will generate a warning if it's below that borderline. You see these a little bit special values because sometimes you do get 100 ppi and you don't want to stop that file, so we put the borderline right underneath that value. For 1-bit images, because they get pixelated or a pixelated result a lot faster, those borderlines are again at a different level. So you've got an error below 349 ppi, warning when it's below 600. So again, the file will be stopped only on error. A warning will inform you. Automated workflows can react on that depending on how they're set up. But at least we give you the information so you can still double check with the customer to see if this was really the goal. Another topic is around overprint and readability. They actually go a little bit hand in hand, because if the overprint is defined wrongly, then sometimes objects can disappear. Here you've got, for example, overprint as a blue circle there, and if you put that on top of the yellow square, you'll get a green circle because it will print on top of it. With knockout, you would knock out the underlying layer and then you would get a blue circle in there. Now, this is still how a lot of RIPs will react to that, and that's why we've got some extra rules there. Let's say that that blue circle is set to overprint, but it's a white circle. Then the white circle would be on top of the yellow square, and that would mean that the white would disappear. So we added extra requirements around white objects, both text and paths or lines, and make sure that they should never be set to overprint, to never have that reaction in a workflow. We don't check for misregistration. So if you would use knockout for small black text or thin black lines, and there would be misregistration issues, then you won't check for that in the digital specification. We do have checks for that in our sheet fed offset specification, because there it does matter and it does cause problems, but we didn't see that as an issue here. Another set of requirements is around minimum point sizes for different objects. It can be text in white or black. It can be rich black, meaning what if text uses more than one color? Do we need the point size maybe a little bigger? Because if you go as low as pure black text, it could still be an issue to read it. And then there's also minimum point sizes defined for thin white lines, thin line width, my apologies. Then ink coverage, we do have very in-depth ink coverage checks for other specifications. In this specification, we left those out because you normally have a RIP that drives the printer, and that would still change the ink combination that would get used on the printer. So checking the PDF before it goes through the RIP didn't seem useful for us, and we expected too many failures there where it wouldn't be a problem to still print the file correctly.
Okay, so as Elli promised, not too many slides. I hope they were not too technical either. So the question now is, where do you go from here? And there are lots of resources that the Ghent Workgroup tries to give you, and that makes sense. And we've listed some of them here. If you go to the gwg.org website, you'll find even more than that. But there are some things on the website that are, I think, really relevant. And maybe I should switch to the website to talk about this. So let me see if I can bring up the GWG website. First of all, if you haven't visited this site, everything on here is free. It is our job or our task to spread the information that we develop to as many people as possible. And of course, making it all free helps. This is the homepage. I want to point out some specific resources that you have on here. And let me start by pointing out once more the fact that we have more webinars. You see the whole list here. You're actually listening to the digital printing one. The large format printing one that we talked about is on May 8th. So just click on here and register. But you can see there is a longer list of webinars that you can register for. Please use that to your advantage. Let me point out the white paper section as well. White papers are educational documents that try to explain in as simple language or understandable language as possible some of these concepts that we have here. And many of these white papers are really, really good to get some background on the topics that we deal with and that you likely deal with. I should also mention the Ghent Output Suite. Ghent Output Suite tries to solve a slightly different problem, and that problem is well, what happens when you have good PDF files, but it is actually the workflow software that you have, or it is the output device that you have that isn't configured correctly, and as such you still end up with a bad result. How do you know about that? Well, the output suite contains a number of test patches that you can run through a workflow or print on an output device, and it has a very easy scoring system. In almost all the patches, if a big X appears, then something is wrong. If the X does not appear, then that particular feature in the workflow or in the RIP is configured correctly. So again, downloadable, you get all the PDF patches that you can use, and you get lots of documentation to go with that. Let me point out that specifically for digital printing, and this is the same for packaging, but specifically for digital printing, there is a separate area created on the Ghent Workgroup website. And that area gives you, in a more bundled way, all the information that is relevant for that particular specification, that particular market segment. And before I go back to the presentation, let me point out this application settings area. That is the area where for all of the specifications you will find application settings to use the specifications in different software applications, whether it's pre-flight software such as Adobe Acrobat or PDF Toolbox or Pitstop, or creation applications such as Quark Express or InDesign. Application settings for those are always contained in that section. I already mentioned this when I went through the Ghent Workgroup website. You have these webinars. Here you have an overview also of the speakers for each of the webinars. Don't hesitate, go register. The spaces for those webinars are limited, so don't wait too long to get your name on the list. So, getting to this point, I think we've talked about just about anything we wanted to talk about here. Let's try to get to some conclusions.
So let me summarize. We have developed a specification specifically for digital print small format. We're also working on one for large format, but that's a different webinar. So this one specifically for small format is available. It is already on our website, and we created a landing page with all of the materials that are relevant to that. Now, why did we create this digital specification? Because we had too many false negatives, too many files that would fail, and that would still print correctly in reality. So we wanted to resolve that. Plus, we also wanted to adapt the specification to what modern workflows can handle correctly. Now, we also have the Ghent Workgroup output suite available on our website. That is also on that landing page. You can use that to test your workflow. So the one will fail files to make sure that these do not get printed if they are not created correctly. The output suite is really a set of files to run through your workflow and see if it prints correctly for good files. We also have a newsletter where we keep people up to date on whatever is new and the latest we develop. Again, free of charge. All of these things are downloadable, and we'll also share that with you.
So, as a last slide perhaps, and this is always one that I want to include because of how the Ghent Workgroup works. This is mostly a volunteer organization and a little bit different from what the International Standards Organization, for example, does, is we try to have a healthy mix of vendors, so software and hardware vendors in graphic arts, and actual users or representatives of users, people who need to use our work in their daily life. Because of this, it's important for us to have people who are printers or publishers or doing actual work in graphic arts, also be a member and participate in discussions. If you think that you have feedback for us, as in there are specifications that are missing, there are options that are missing, some things are not working, please get in contact with us. You can simply send us an email. We'll show you a slide with our email addresses here in a second. Talk to us and see how you can participate. And the people who participate are not just from vendors or from user associations. We have some printers that participate directly, for example, because that way they can hear about what we're doing much earlier, they can take advantage of it much earlier, but also, and very importantly, they can make themselves heard, and they can vote or participate in the work so that they are sure that it will actually work in practice. And that's very, very important to us. So please cooperate with us if you have the possibility. You see our email addresses there. Just send either of us an email and we'll get you in contact with the correct people.
So with that, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the question window in your control panel. We will handle a few of the questions now. One question is, where do I find the slides for this presentation? Actually, we will be publishing the slides and the recording on our website after concluding the webinar. You'll have to give us a little bit of time to do that, but we will publish everything on our website, so you will be able to get that. Then there is also a question around the pre-flight profiles. Are there also pre-flight profiles for the digital print standard? Shall you answer, or I?
The answer is yes.
Yes, we have them. We're actually in the middle of publishing them to the application page, but we can share the profiles. They already exist. They just didn't get live to our website yet. So we've got, I think, pre-flight profiles for 2 vendors today, which is our reference implementations, Callas and Focus. And we can share those profiles, and those are also usable by any of the OEMs that use the technology. Because the specification was based on the 2015 specification, the pre-flight profiles for this new digital specification can be used with any software that already supported the 2015 specification. And there is a location on the website where you can get a list of all of the applications that support it. Plus, you can also see that overview on the application page.
Good. Then, if you run into other questions as you digest the information we have given you, or if there is anything specific to your workflow that you don't want to ask here publicly, again, just send us an email. We will be happy to handle those. And other than that, I think the only thing that we have to do is thank you for your time and for listening to another Ghent Workgroup webinar. And I'm sure we will meet many of you virtually in the next upcoming webinars as well.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for everybody staying on the whole time, and talk to you next time.
Thanks. Have a great day.